The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was the largest room Admiral Park had ever seen. Pillars of living crystal rose toward a ceiling that seemed to touch the stars themselves. Thousands of alien delegates sat in floating platforms, their strange bodies glowing and shifting in colors that human eyes could barely understand. The air smelled of chemicals and flowers and something electric that made skin tingle. He had stood in this exact spot 46 times before. His hair had turned gray in this room. His back had grown bent from bowing to beings who never bowed back. Today was the 47th time, and he already knew how it would end. The human territories request once again a permanent seat on the Galactic Council, said. His voice was calm and steady. He had practiced these words so many times that they no longer felt like his own. We have served this galaxy for 300 years. We have traded fairly. We have kept our promises. We have asked for nothing but respect. The High Speaker floated forward. He was a being made of crystal and light, ancient beyond measure, beautiful and cold like a distant star. His voice rang through the hall like breaking glass. "Humanity is young," he said. The words were the same as last time, and the time before that. Your species has existed for merely a moment. Perhaps in another millennium, when you have proven yourselves worthy, we will consider your request. Behind, Ambassador stood perfectly still. She had spent 20 years learning every language spoken in this galaxy. She knew the customs of 50 different species. She could greet a trader in their own tongue and discuss philosophy with a scholar. None of it had ever mattered. To the council, humans were still newcomers, primitives, creatures who had crawled out of their small blue world and somehow stumbled into the stars. The fact that humans had built ships, cured diseases, and created art that made even the pause did not matter. Humanity was young, and youth was weakness. Bowed his head. "We thank the council for their consideration," he said. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. As he turned to leave, a delegate laughed. There were amphibious beings with smooth skin and eyes like black pearls. They controlled half the trade in the galaxy, and they had grown rich by selling to everyone and respecting no one. "Perhaps the humans should try again in 1,000 years, they said, if they survive that long." The hall filled with laughter. It echoed off the crystal pillars and rained down on like stones. He did not react. He simply walked out of the great hall with beside him, their footsteps silent on the polished floor. They did not speak until they reached their small ship, docked in the lowest level of the station where the air was thin and the lights flickered. Human ships were not allowed in the main docking bays. They were too ugly, the council said, too primitive. "How many more times?" asked. Her voice was tired. Sat down heavily in the pilot's chair. He was 63 years old. He had given his entire adult life to this mission, and he had nothing to show for it but gray hair and tired bones. "It does not matter anymore," he said quietly. Looked at him with surprise. "What do you mean?" Pulled out a small device from his pocket. It was a communication unit, heavily encrypted, marked with symbols that had never seen before. He pressed a button, and a hologram appeared above his palm. It showed a star map, but not of this galaxy. It showed something beyond, something in the dark spaces between the spiral arms where no one had ever traveled. Project Exodus said, "It is ready." Stared at the map. Her heart began to beat faster. They actually did it. They found a way. Dr. Han confirmed it this morning. The path is clear. We can leave. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of what was saying filled the small ship like water filling a sinking vessel. "Leave," repeated. "You mean all of us, every human." "Every single one." Sat down slowly. She thought about her apartment on the human colony of Nu, about the small garden she had planted there, about the view of the twin moons rising over the mountains. She thought about the merchant who had refused to sell her medicine when her mother was sick because humans were not priority customers. She thought about the soldiers who had laughed when human refugees fled a supernova, calling them weak for not being able to survive in the vacuum of space like they could. They will not even notice we are gone, she said bitterly. No, agreed. They will not, that is the point. Far away, on a research station hidden in the darkness between stars, Dr. Hen watched data streams flow across her screens. She was 51 years old, with short black hair and eyes that had seen too many failures and too few victories. But today, for the first time in decades, she was smiling. The equations were perfect. The pathway was stable. Humanity could travel to another galaxy, one that had never been touched by a fresh start, a new home. Her assistant, a young man named, stood beside her. He was only 25, but he had already been chosen to lead the political side of the Exodus. His grandfather had been a diplomat who died waiting for the council to acknowledge humanity. His father had been a trader who was cheated by until he lost everything. Had grown up knowing that the galaxy did not want his people. "When do we begin?" he asked. Turned off her screens. The laboratory fell into darkness except for the distant light of stars. "We have already begun," she said. 3 years from now, there will be no humans left in this galaxy. We will take everything we have built. We will leave nothing behind. And we will not say goodbye. Nodded slowly. He felt something strange in his chest. It was not sadness. It was not anger. It was something quieter, something that had been waiting for this moment his entire life. It was relief. "Will they come looking for us?" he asked. Laughed softly. It was not a happy sound. "They have ignored us for 300 years, she said. "They will not start paying attention now." She was wrong about that. But by the time the galaxy realized what it had lost, humanity would be gone, and the silence they left behind would be louder than any words they had ever spoken. The order came on a quiet morning, delivered through encrypted channels that no alien technology could detect. Every human colony, every station, every ship received the same message at the same moment. It contained only 2 words: begin withdrawal. On the border station of 7, a young engineer named read the message 3 times before she believed it. She was 28 years old, born on this station, raised among the stars. She had never seen Earth except in photographs, but she had always known this day might come. Her parents had whispered about it when they thought she was asleep. Her teachers had prepared her for it without ever saying the words out loud. Now it was real. Looked around her small apartment. There was not much to pack. Humans had learned long ago not to accumulate too many possessions. They had been forced to move too many times, pushed from one corner of the galaxy to another whenever the alien powers decided they wanted the space. Everything she owned could fit in a single bag. But there was one thing she could not take with her. In the center of the station's communal plaza, there was a fountain. Had built it herself 5 years ago, using scraps of metal and recycled water filters. It was not beautiful by standards. It was not valuable by standards. But it made a soft, musical sound when the water fell, and human children would gather around it to listen and play. She went to the plaza one last time. The fountain was still running, its gentle music filling the empty space. A few alien merchants passed by without looking at it. To them, it was just another piece of human junk. Knelt beside the fountain and turned off the water. The music stopped. She carefully disconnected the pieces and placed them in a container. She would not leave this behind for them to mock. A merchant stopped to watch her. His name was Han, and he had traded with the humans for decades. He was not cruel like some of his kind, but he was not kind either. He simply did not care one way or another about the small beings who lived on the edge of his territory. "Moving somewhere?" he asked. Looked up at him. For a moment she wanted to tell him everything. She wanted to say that humanity was leaving, that they were taking their fountain and their music and their hope, and that one day he would understand what he had lost. But she said nothing. The orders were clear. No warnings, no goodbyes, no explanations. "Just cleaning," she said. She finished packing the fountain and walked away. Han watched her go with mild curiosity. then forgot about her entirely. Across the galaxy, the same scene played out 1,000,000 times. Human families packed their belongings in the middle of the night. Human businesses closed without explanation. Human ships departed from stations and never returned. On the planet of Four, a human teacher named Song gathered her students for one last lesson. They were children of engineers and scientists, born far from Earth, raised in the shadow of alien contempt. They did not know what was happening, but they could feel the tension in the air. "Today we are going to talk about journeys," said. She smiled at them, but there were tears in her eyes. Sometimes when people are not welcome somewhere, they have to find a new home. It is not a sad thing. It is a brave thing. A little girl raised her hand. "Are we going on a journey, Teacher Song?" Knelt down beside her. "Yes, we are, and it is going to be the greatest journey anyone has ever taken." The children did not understand, but they trusted her. They followed her to the transport ships that waited in the shadows, and they did not look back. Secretary General worked without sleep for 3 years. He coordinated the movement of 40 billion people across 1,000 worlds. He arranged for ships to be built in secret, for supplies to be gathered without attracting attention, for families to be reunited before the final departure. The hardest part was the silence. Humans wanted to shout at the galaxy. They wanted to say, "We gave you everything, and you gave us nothing. We healed your sick and built your machines and explored your dangerous places, and you laughed at us. Now we are leaving, and you will never see us again." But understood that silence was more powerful than words. The galaxy had ignored humanity for 300 years. Now humanity would ignore them back. The final convoy gathered at the edge of known space, in a region so dark and empty that no alien ship had ever traveled there. Millions of human vessels waited in formation, their lights twinkling like a new constellation. Dr. Han stood on the bridge of the lead ship, the Silent Dawn. She had grown old in the service of this dream. Her hair was white now, her hands thin and spotted with age, but her eyes were bright with purpose. "Is everyone accounted for?" she asked. Her assistant checked the data. 40,200,000,000 humans, every colony, every station, every ship. "And the last one?" "Commander Ryu is still in position. He will leave after we are through." Nodded, had volunteered for the most difficult job of all. He would be the last human in the Milky Way, the one who would make sure nothing was left behind. The portal opened before them. It was not a gate or a tunnel, but something harder to describe. A fold in the fabric of space itself, a pathway to somewhere new. The stars on the other side were different colors than the ones humanity had known. "Send the signal," said. One by one, the human ships began to move forward. They passed through the portal in perfect order, families and friends and strangers united by a single purpose. They carried with them everything humanity had ever built: their art, their music, their memories, their hopes. They left behind only silence. Commander Ryu watched from his station as the last ship disappeared into the portal. He was alone now, the only human left in a galaxy of trillions. The weight of that loneliness pressed against his chest, but he did not let it break him. He had one more job to do. He walked through the empty corridors of the station, past rooms where families had laughed and argued and loved each other, past the cafeteria where children had complained about the food, past the observation deck where couples had watched the stars together. Everything was clean. Everything was empty. The humans had left nothing for the aliens to study or steal or mock. Reached the control room and initiated the self-destruct sequence. He did not feel sad. He felt proud. Humanity had built this station with their own hands, and they would not let it fall into the hands of those who had never respected them. He walked to his shuttle, the last human vessel in the galaxy. As the station began to crumble behind him, he flew toward the portal, toward his people, toward a future that the Milky Way would never see. The portal closed behind him, and the darkness was complete. In the Great Hall of the Galactic Council, the delegates continued their endless debates. They did not notice that the human ambassador's seat was empty. They did not notice that the human quarter of the station had gone dark. They did not notice anything at all. But in time they would, and by then it would be far too late. The first to notice were the general stood in his command center, staring at reports that made no sense. His species was built for war. They were large, armored beings with 4 arms and skin like stone. They feared nothing in the galaxy, but the numbers on his screen filled him with an emotion he did not recognize. "What do you mean there is no human traffic?" he demanded. His subordinate, a younger named, shifted nervously. "The border stations report 0 human ships for the past 60 standard days. No traders, no transports, no diplomatic vessels, nothing." "That is impossible. The humans are everywhere. They are like insects." "Word General, they were everywhere." Contacted the human embassy on the... There was no answer. He sent soldiers to investigate and they found the building empty. Not abandoned, but cleaned. Every piece of furniture, every document, every decoration had been removed. The walls were bare. The floors were polished. It was as if the humans had never been there at all. "Find them," ordered. "Search every system, every station, every planet." They searched for months. They found nothing but empty buildings and silent colonies. The humans had vanished like smoke in the wind. The panicked first. Trade Master N sat in his office, surrounded by reports of failure. Shipping routes were collapsing. Prices were skyrocketing. Goods that had once flowed freely across the galaxy were now stuck in ports with no one to move them. "How is this possible?" he shouted at his advisors. "We have millions of ships. We have the largest trading network in the galaxy." "Yes, Trade Master," one advisor said carefully, "but the humans ran the maintenance networks. They designed the navigation systems. They trained the pilots. So hire new ones." "There are no new ones. The humans were the only species willing to work in the dangerous regions. They were the only ones who could repair the old systems. They were..." The advisor hesitated. "They were the only ones who understood how everything worked together." N stared at him. "Are you telling me that we cannot operate our own trade network without the humans?" The advisor did not answer. He did not need to. Within 6 months, half the trading stations had shut down. Ships sat idle because no one knew how to fix them. Colonies that depended on imported food began to starve. The Great Trade Guild, which had mocked humanity for 3 centuries, was falling apart. They discovered the truth last. High Speaker floated through the empty corridors of what had once been the Human Science District. He was young for only 800 years old, and he had always been curious about the strange little beings that his elders dismissed so easily. He found a single data chip sitting on a table, as if someone had left it there on purpose. It was human technology, simple and crude by standards. But when he activated it, the message that played made his crystal form tremble. A human face appeared in the hologram. It was, and he looked tired but peaceful. "To whoever finds this," said, "I want you to understand something. We did not leave in anger. We did not leave in hatred. We left because we finally understood that we would never be welcome here." Watched in silence as the message continued. "For 300 years we asked only for respect. We traded fairly. We kept our promises. We helped whoever needed helping, even those who treated us with contempt. And in return, we received nothing but mockery and dismissal." Paused. His eyes, which had seemed calm, now showed something deeper. Pain, perhaps, or maybe just exhaustion. "So we are leaving. We have found a new home far beyond your reach. We are taking everything we built, everything we learned, everything we dreamed. We are leaving nothing behind for you to study or steal or mock." The hologram flickered. "Do not follow us. You would not find us even if you tried. And do not mourn our absence. You never wanted us here in the first place." The message ended, stood in the darkness for a long time, feeling something he had never felt before. It took him several minutes to identify the emotion. It was shame. He brought the message to the Galactic Council. The great hall, which had once been filled with thousands of delegates, was now half empty. There were too busy fighting border wars to attend. They were too busy trying to save their crumbling economy. Only the remained, and even they seemed diminished. "The humans are gone," announced. "All of them, every colony, every station, every ship. They have left our galaxy entirely." The others stirred with confusion. "That is impossible," one of them said. "No species has ever left the galaxy. The distances are too vast. The technology does not exist." "The humans built it," said. "While we were laughing at their primitive ships, they were developing technology we cannot even understand." "Then we must find them. We must bring them back." Shook his head. "Did you not hear me? They do not want to be found. And even if we could find them, why would they return? What would we offer them? The same contempt we have shown them for 3 centuries. The council fell silent. For the first time in 10,000 years, they had no answer. Outside, the galaxy was changing. The regions that humans had once patrolled were becoming lawless. Pirates who had feared human security forces now roamed freely. Diseases that human doctors had contained were spreading again. Systems that human engineers had maintained were failing. And in the dark spaces between the stars, something worse was stirring. The humans had never spoken about what they found in the deep void, the places where no other species dared to travel. They had simply dealt with it quietly, protecting the galaxy from threats it did not even know existed. Now there was no one to stand guard. A merchant named Han sat in a refugee camp, waiting for food that might never come. He was old now, his scales faded and cracked. He had lost everything when the trade routes collapsed: his ships, his wealth, his family. He thought about the human woman he had seen years ago, the one who had been dismantling a fountain. He had asked if she was moving somewhere. She had said she was just cleaning. She had been lying, of course. She had been saying goodbye, and he had been too blind to see it. "We should have listened," he whispered to no one. "We should have listened when we had the chance." But the chance was gone now, carried away by 40 billion humans who had finally stopped asking to be accepted and had decided to make their own future instead. The galaxy would survive. It always did. But it would never be the same. And every species, from the proudest to the humblest soldier, would carry the memory of the small beings who had asked only for respect and had been. The humans were gone, and the silence they left behind was deafening. 20 years had passed since the humans left, and the galaxy was burning. Han sat in the ruins of what had once been the greatest trading station in space. The lights had failed years ago. The air recyclers barely worked. Half the station's population had died from disease or starvation, and the other half was fighting over the scraps that remained. He was 93 years old now, ancient for His children were dead. His had fled on refugee ships that never reached their destinations. He had nothing left except memories and regrets. A young woman sat beside him. Her name was Senna, and she had been born after the humans left. She had never seen a functioning trade route or a working hospital or a city that was not falling apart. To her, the collapse was simply the way things were. "Tell me about them again," she said. "The humans." Han closed his eyes. He had told this story so many times that the words came automatically, like breathing. "They were small," he said, "smaller than us. They lived such short lives, maybe 80 or 90 years if they were lucky. We thought that made them weak. We thought their short lives meant they could not achieve anything important." "But they built all of this," Senna said, gesturing at the crumbling station around them. "The trade routes, the navigation systems, the medical centers." "Yes, we did not realize it at the time, but they built almost everything that mattered. Not because we asked them to, but because they wanted to help. They saw problems and they fixed them. They saw suffering and they tried to end it. They did not ask for payment or recognition. They just helped. Senna was quiet for a moment. Why did they leave? Han opened his eyes and looked at her. She was young and thin and hungry, born into a broken world that she had done nothing to deserve. Because we treated them like nothing, he said. We laughed at them. We cheated them. We refused to let them sit at our tables or speak in our councils. For 300 years they asked only to be treated as equals, and we said no. So they left, and they took everything good with them. The situation was worse. The Dominion had collapsed entirely. General had died in the 3rd year of the Civil War, killed by his own soldiers when he could not protect them from the things that came from the dead zones. Now there was no Dominion at all, just scattered tribes fighting over the remains of a once great empire. A warrior named stood on the walls of his village, watching the horizon. He was young and strong, built for battle like all his kind. But his enemies were not other. His enemies were things that no one had ever seen before, creatures that crawled out of the darkness between stars. The humans had known about these creatures. They had fought them in secret, keeping the galaxy safe from horrors it could not imagine. But the humans were gone now, and the creatures were spreading. They are coming again, his scout reported. A large group, more than last time. Gripped his weapon. How long? 2 hours, maybe less. There was no point in running. There was nowhere left to run. The creatures had already consumed half the territory. Soon they would consume the rest. Prepare the defenses, said. We will fight. His scout hesitated. Is there any hope? Thought about the stories his grandmother had told him. Stories about small beings who had once patrolled the dark zones and kept the monsters at bay. He had not believed those stories when he was young. Now he wished they had been true. No, he said honestly, but we will fight anyway. That is all we can do. They retreated into their crystal cities and tried to pretend the universe was not falling apart around them. High Speaker spent his days in the archives, studying everything the humans had left behind. Most of their records had been destroyed, but he had found fragments here and there, pieces of a puzzle that he was slowly putting together. The humans had been remarkable, not because they were strong or powerful or ancient, but because they were creative. They saw solutions where other species saw only problems. They built bridges between enemies and found cures for diseases that had plagued the galaxy for. They asked questions that no one else thought to ask and found answers that no one else could find. And though in their arrogance, had dismissed them as primitives. Found a recording from a human scientist, a woman named Han. She was explaining why the humans had decided to leave. We tried everything, she said in the recording. We learned your languages. We followed your customs. We gave you our technology and our labor and our loyalty. And every time we asked to be treated as equals, you said no. You said we were too young, too primitive, too different. She paused and could see the exhaustion in her face. So we stopped asking. We realized that we would never earn your respect, no matter how hard we tried. And we decided that our children deserved better than a lifetime of being looked down upon. So we are leaving. We are going somewhere new, somewhere we can build a society based on merit instead of prejudice. The recording ended and sat in silence for a long time. He understood now what the humans had taken when they left. It was not just their technology or their labor or their creativity. It was something more fundamental, something the galaxy had never valued because it had always been there. Hope. The humans had been the dreamers. They had been the ones who believed that things could get better, that problems could be solved, that enemies could become friends. They had carried that hope with them everywhere they went, sharing it freely with anyone who would listen. And now they were gone, and the hope had gone with them. The galaxy was not just falling apart physically, it was falling apart spiritually. Species that had once cooperated were now fighting. Alliances that had lasted for were crumbling. Everyone was so focused on survival that no one thought about the future anymore. In a small shelter on a dying world, an old woman gathered children around her and told them stories about the humans. She described their strange, soft skin and their bright, curious eyes, and the way they smiled even when things were difficult. They carried something special inside them, she said, something that made them keep going even when everything seemed hopeless. They called it many things, but the best word for it was hope. "What is hope?" one of the children asked. The old woman was quiet for a long moment. She remembered a time when she had known the answer to that question. But that was long ago, before the humans left, before the world fell apart. "I do not remember," she admitted, "but I think if we try hard enough, we can learn again." The children did not understand, but they listened and they remembered, and somewhere deep inside them, a tiny spark began to glow. It was not much, but in a galaxy that had lost its way, even a tiny spark was better than total darkness. 20 years after humanity's departure, the galaxy was still falling. But for the first time, some of its inhabitants were beginning to understand what they had lost, and a few of them, just a few, were starting to wonder if there was still time to become something better. The answer, of course, was far away, in a different galaxy entirely, where humanity was building wonders that the Milky Way would never see. In a galaxy that had never known war, humanity built a new home. Captain Song stood on the observation deck of the exploration vessel New Dawn, watching a binary sunrise paint the sky in colors that had no names in any human language. Behind her, she could hear children running through the corridors, their laughter echoing off the walls. Those children had been born here in this new galaxy. They had never known rejection. They had never been told they were too young or too primitive or too different. They had grown up believing that they could be anything, achieve anything, become anything. Smiled. This was what humanity had left the Milky Way to build. The New Dawn was one of 10,000 exploration vessels that mapped the new galaxy. Every month they discovered new worlds, new wonders, new possibilities. The universe here was rich beyond anything humanity had imagined. There were planets covered in crystal forests that sang when the wind blew. There were moons with oceans of liquid silver. There were asteroid fields where precious minerals floated like snow. And there was no one to tell them they could not have it. Humanity had spread across 300 worlds in the 50 years since the Exodus. They had built cities that floated on clouds and stations that orbited black holes. They had cured diseases that had plagued them and developed technology that would have seemed like magic to their ancestors. But the most important thing they had built was something that could not be seen or touched. They had built a society where every person was valued, where every voice was heard, where no child would ever grow up feeling like they did not belong. In the capital city of New Seoul, Elder Park sat in a garden filled with flowers from 100 different worlds. He was 113 years old now, kept alive by medical technology that the old galaxy had never even imagined. His hair was white and his body was frail, but his mind was still sharp. A young woman sat beside him. Her name was, and she was the great-granddaughter of, the man who had led the Exodus. She was 32 years old, and she had just been elected to lead the Human Council. "Are you nervous?" asked her. Shook her head. "No, I have been preparing for this my whole life. My great-grandfather made sure of that." Smiled. He had known well. They had worked together during the darkest days of the Exodus, when every decision could have meant the difference between survival and extinction. Had died 15 years ago, peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by family. He had lived long enough to see his dream become reality. "He will be proud of you," said. "I know," paused. "Can I ask you something, Elder Park?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret leaving?" Was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the Galactic Council, about the laughter that had followed him out of that great hall. He thought about the traitors who had cheated his people and the soldiers who had mocked their weakness. He thought about 300 years of asking for respect and being. "No," he said finally. "I regret that we had to leave. I regret that we could not make them see us as equals, but I do not regret the choice itself. We gave them every chance and they chose to look away." In a laboratory on the other side of the planet, Dr. Han made her final discovery. She was 101 years old, the oldest human alive. Her body was failing despite the best medicine humanity could offer. She had perhaps a few months left, maybe less. But she had one more gift to give her people before she died. She had found a way to observe the old galaxy from across the void. The images that appeared on her screen were difficult to look at. The Milky Way was in chaos. Great civilizations had fallen. Worlds that had once been centers of culture and learning were now wastelands. The trade routes were gone. The alliances were shattered. The galaxy that had once laughed at humanity was now drowning in its own mistakes. Came to see her that afternoon, showed her the images without saying a word. For a long time, simply stared at the screen. She saw the crumbling stations and the refugee fleets and the burning cities. She saw species that had once been proud and powerful now fighting over scraps like animals. "Should we help them?" her aide asked quietly. "We have the technology, we have the resources, we could go back." Did not answer immediately. She thought about her great-grandfather's message, the one he had left behind for the aliens to find. "We did not leave in anger. We left because we understood that we would never be welcome." "No," she said finally. "But they are suffering." "Yes, and that is sad, but they had 300 years to see us as partners, as equals, as friends. They chose to see us as pests. They laughed when we asked for respect. They turned away when we needed help." His voice was not angry. It was simply tired. "We cannot save people who refuse to see the value in others. We can only build something better for ourselves." She turned away from the screen, toward the window where the new galaxy stretched out before them. Stars that know or would ever see. Worlds that would never know prejudice or contempt. A future that belonged to humanity alone. "Our duty is to our children," said. "We will not repeat the mistakes of the past. We will not teach them to hate the old galaxy, but we will not teach them to go back either. The Milky Way made its choice. Now we make ours." On a memorial wall in the heart of New Seoul, the names of every human who had suffered in the old galaxy were inscribed in light. 40 billion names, each one representing a life lived under the shadow of contempt. Farmers and scientists and artists and soldiers, parents and children, dreamers and doers. Above the names, a single phrase glowed in the darkness. "We did not leave in anger. We left in silence so that our children would never have to beg for dignity." Visitors came to the wall every day. Some were old, survivors of the Exodus who remembered what it felt like to be dismissed. Some were young, children and who had only heard stories about the old galaxy. All of them stood in silence, reading the names, remembering the past. And then they walked away, back into the sunlight, back into a world where they were valued and respected and free. Elder Park died peacefully 3 months later, surrounded by 4 generations of his family. His last words were simple: "We made it." Dr. Han followed him a few weeks after that. She died in her laboratory, her hand resting on the console that showed the distant Milky Way. Her last thought was not of regret or sadness, but of satisfaction. She had given her people the stars, and they had built heaven among them. In the old galaxy, the suffering continued. The faded into silence, the scattered to the winds, the fought and died and were forgotten. The creatures from the void spread across empty worlds, finding nothing left to consume. And somewhere in the darkest corner of the Milky Way, a young alien child asked her grandmother why the stars seemed dimmer than they used to be. "Because the light bringers are gone," the grandmother said. They were called humans, and they carried hope wherever they went, but we did not see their value until it was too late. Will they ever come back? The grandmother was quiet for a long time. She remembered a universe that had been bright and full of possibility, before the collapse, before the darkness, before everything fell apart. No, she said finally, they will not come back. They found a better place where they do not have to beg for respect, and they will never look back. The child did not understand. But one day, when she was older and the last lights of the old galaxy had finally gone out, she would remember her grandmother's words. And she would understand at last what her people had lost when they laughed at the small beings from Earth. Hope, they had lost hope. And they would never get it back. Far away across the infinite void, humanity continued to build, to dream, to grow. They did not forget where they came from, but they did not look back either. They looked forward toward a future that belonged to them alone. And in that future, there was no place for those who had refused to see their worth. The galaxy that had dismissed humanity faded into darkness. The galaxy that had welcomed them burned with light. And the universe, vast and indifferent, continued on its endless journey through time. Some stories do not have happy endings for everyone, but for humanity, the story was just beginning.